Hello and welcome. My name is Evgeny Rusakov and you're watching TVP World interview from Vilnius. In February this year, a colleague of mine from Zimbabwe, journalist Blessed Mhlanga, was arrested and up to this moment is under detention. The charges relate to his interviews in which his interviewed guest demanded the resignation of President Emmerson Mnangagwa, accusing him of nepotism, corruption and incompetence. According to Human Rights Watch, detention of Blessed Mhlanga highlights threats to free expression and media freedom. To discuss problems of freedom of speech, we are joined today by the chairman of the Lithuanian Union of Journalists, Dainius Radzevičius. Dainius, glad to see you with us here today, sir. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
First of all, I have to say that these words that I've said, I personally know this journalist, Blessed Mhlanga. We met in USA, and this is kind of my own personal story. So he's my colleague from Zimbabwe, and he's now arrested, and he's under detention. So first question is journalist a good profession today, Dainius?
Good question. Talking about profession, it depends on country. Because professional journalists in countries like, let's say, any of European Union countries, more or less you have conditions in which you can be more or less free, collecting information, providing information, and criticizing someone. Not in all the countries, but at least you mentioned prison. Being in prison, it's already past story, 20th century in Europe, in most of countries. We have more sad stories, killed journalists. And I visited in February this year Sri Lanka. And in Sri Lanka, almost all the famous journalists who has experience dealing with corruption cases and investigative journalists, all of them was actually prosecuted in the beginning, and then they are killed, all of them. And when I discussed with tour guides or regular people about media, I said, oh, we have nice media, everything is fine. I said, what about investigative journalism and cases of corruption? I said, all the journalists, if they are at least touching the stories, they are killed. And publicly, like punishment. That's why, if we look to the profession of journalism, we need to know this is still one of most dangerous professions. And talking about countries like Ukraine for a moment, because of aggression of Russia, any of journalists, independent journalists or journalists who are just visiting this country, they can be killed and targeted, actually, especially by Russian army. And in the 20th century, we had standards, international standards, for some kind of organizations, also press.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
Usually, we needed to protect such kind of people. Nowadays, my colleague says, like even during the revolution in Belarus in 2020, or in Ukraine nowadays, if you are under press protection officially, you are in most of cases targeted. And this is a war crime, but still some countries, they doesn't follow rules coming from 20th century.
So it looks like journalist is a good profession, but you have to be courageous enough to work it, to do it.
It's a very interesting profession. I mean, it's still very interesting, but coming, for example, to Reporters Without Borders index of press freedom in most of countries, we can look to countries like Finland, for example, and most of Scandinavian countries which are in neighborhood with Finland, they have still harassment, they have abuse and, let's say, at least very critical comments on social networks against journalists, especially female. And some of them are just, are like persecuted on social networks, and sometimes they are hiding phone numbers and a home address, especially because some unhappy people about journalists and stories and everything, or supporters of some politicians, for example, they are pushing journalists, in let's say, maybe not physically dangerous way, but attacks on social networks, they seem sometimes not really positive, actually.
Okay. Well, since you've mentioned this Media Freedom Index, so my next question is just about that. So according to this recent Media Freedom Index, the situation in the world is deteriorating. So, and this year, for the first time, it is rated as difficult. So what's your take on this? How come we got to this kind of situation?
Yeah, it's difficult, and we need to know that World Press Freedom Index, it shows how free or not are media and journalists. This is one of arguments to discuss about quality also of democracy, freedom of all the people of society in any of countries, because freedom of speech and freedom of media usually is like you can indicate how much people can talk publicly about any issues, because if journalists cannot, it means regular people, they can less. And you mentioned already that more and more countries are in, let's say, red field or red flag.
Yes.
Which means
I've looked at that map. It's totally red.
And also countries which is still very democratic countries. I mentioned Finland, but also Australia. Also, I can mention Canada. They also are losing positions, good positions in this index, which means that
What's happening?
Let's start with politicians and governments. In most of countries, journalists have this feeling that the pressure of politicians are higher and higher. Also, they are ignoring journalists. They don't give information at all. We have this example, for example, in the United States, President Trump's administration. Just because AP, Association of Press, they didn't agree to say some places will be called like American Gulf, not Mexican Gulf, for example. They cannot get to a building and take information there.
You mean to the White House?
Yes, exactly. And it looks like for some people like, who cares? It's not a big problem. You can read messages on X account of Mr. Trump or something, but no, it's the position. The pressure to journalists not to be really free, it's usually starts with position of politicians or people who have power. Also business people. And coming to Canada, Australia, also we can mention also Finland, which are now just joined NATO, like country with freedom of press, 5th place, perfect. But our colleagues, for example, Salla Nazarenka from Journalists Union of Finland, she visited in March Vilnius, and she mentioned once again, the politicians, they are doing pressure to a public broadcaster. They are cutting money for them. And this is a kind of pressure, which are one of signals which shows like press freedom we have less and less. And in countries even with free media. But who knows what will happen in 10 years. And in many countries, even democratic countries, media and journalists, especially journalists, they are not just criticized by politicians. Like Argentina, for example, many countries, candidates to a president, they have so bad words about journalists. They do pressure, and they are doing a lot of things like exclude journalists from different media formats. I mean, this is big pressure.
As I've read in that index, it's mainly economic pressure.
Also because politicians, they can create conditions in their country. It's one part. But also advertisement, also pluralism of media market. It's also a good thing, but you know, from very practical situations, we see how, for example, Mr. Musk talks about media. You don't need media. You don't need journalists. You have X. X is the best place, which is better than journalists.
And he owns it, and he controls it.
Exactly.
That's right.
And also talking about media, we see even in European Union countries, we have this concentration of media sector and market. That's why we have specific act, Media Freedom Act, new one adopted by European institutions, and now coming to the force in August this year. And countries must be prepared to define many new things. For example, how to define advertisements which are financed by governmental institutions. It must be defined like advertisement, political advertisement, country advertisement, not like hidden advertisement. We had examples like that. That's why this not really transparent advertisement market, also influence of states, of state institutions, it shows we have less and less freedoms. In Lithuania, we have cases like some municipalities, they are punishing media if they are criticizing mayor of city.
Okay, then there's my next question then. Is there any free and independent media today, and how could it survive in these circumstances?
We can look to any of markets. We have in all the democratic countries' markets at least part of media which are success stories, let's say. They have subscribers, they have advertisement, they have a lot of diversification issues with incomes and everything. We have quality journalism. But if you look to whole the market, we can see clearly in European Union countries, in Lithuania as well, and I guess in neighbor countries except Russia and Belarus, it's a different case, but We have very clear situation. 2 or 3 major players, they take almost all the money because any of businesses, of politicians, they would like to deal with biggest media.
Well, yeah, that's right.
The niche media, middle level media, they are outside business in most of cases. That's why even it's okay, legal, you can define like situation is still in competition situation. But if social markets, social networks, they get more and more money from traditional media sector, like in Lithuania, for example, and biggest media players in country, they take the rest, peanuts left for small media. If you have media support foundations, state money, public money, it's fine, but it's not enough.
Okay, then there's 2 countries I would like to discuss next with you. It's Lithuania, because it dropped to 14th place, and Estonia, which is ranked 2nd in the world. So what's happening? What's happening with Lithuania, briefly, and what's happening with Estonia? And I mean, what could we learn from Estonia, if we can learn anything from them?
2 things, long story short.
Okay.
Looking to a map, an index, I guess top 20, even top 25 maybe countries, they are very similar. I mean, no big difference in these countries about freedom, but they have very few details which are different. For example, last year in Lithuania, during elections campaigns, presidential, European Parliament, but as well parliamentary, we had politicians and leaders of parties who really criticized strongly public broadcaster, for example, and they even promised some audit of public broadcasting, maybe with some influence, changing management in the future, and so on and so on. Such kind of messages publicly published in Lithuania and outside Lithuania, they destroys everything we built for many years about freedom of press in Lithuania. In Estonia, we have different case, and mostly also because Estonian experts and media, they are trying inside the country to solve most of problems. They didn't go publicly immediately to international organizations, European Federation of Journalists, International Federation of Journalists, talking about problems inside the country. Maybe this difference makes also some let's say, small details in this index, because Lithuanian colleagues, they like to speak loudly and publicly about any of problems, just to solve as quick as we can do it.
Do you think we, the world in general, have hope for free and independent media and for a proper freedom of speech?
Last 10 years, maybe more, we have very clear tendency about consumption of media and content, generally. Most of people, and more people, they would like to get opinions, not information. They would like to get positions, not the facts. They would like to get solutions, not the questions. For politicians and for media. That's why it's decreasing consumption of quality media, of news programs and journalism, investigative and so on. But we need to learn from countries in which decision makers, business people, more educated people, or maybe people who has critical thinking on everything that's happened, they need to cooperate with media to provide quality information, expertise and everything. That's why if we speak about mass of people, sadly, entertainment, sadly, opinions, polarized opinions especially, this is priority.
Some
content.
populistic stuff as well.
We define as a populistic, but this is very normal for most of people, not to get questions from media, but to get answers. System of education, formal and informal, would be one of solutions, but we need more. We need decision makers, people who has power in the country. Very good cooperation with media, because the content, this is production not of journalists, production of all stakeholders of public sphere.
Dainius, I guess there's nothing more to add, except that I would like to wish my colleague Blessed Mhlanga from Zimbabwe good luck and, keep strong.
And solidarity. We need solidarity.
Cheers. Thank you. And I would like to remind our viewers that our guest for today was a chairman of the Lithuanian Union of Journalists, Dainius Radzevičius. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us.